Driving is way too easy. I mean, I can practically speed down the highway in my 2001 Toyota Camry blindfolded with a dozen screaming goats in the back. At least, that's what I thought, until I drove my car into the Hudson Bay and found myself in eastern Nunavut. So in order to prove to the DMV that I've been rehabilitated, I will be beating Garfield Kart Furious Racing without hitting the gas pedal. Let me explain. In all kart racing games, you have to hit a button to accelerate. I will not be doing that. Instead, I will be relying on the tools the game provides me. The challenge will be completed after I beat the first 4 tracks of the Lasagna Cup. Let's get started. So it turns out this might actually be more difficult than I thought. So how can we do this? There are 3 main mechanics we'll be abusing in this run. First, item boxes. By activating either lasagna or perfume, we're able to gain forward momentum without hitting the gas pedal. In last place, we're much more likely to get both lasagna and perfume. However, we're also more likely to get pillows, which are the death of this run. But we'll get to that later. Secondly, booster pads. These orange triangles on the ground will boost us forward, again, without any gas inputs. And lastly, we can use the boosts we gain from the items and pads to start a drift chain. Basically, drifting gives you a slight speed boost, similar to the effects of lasagna. We can use the boost from one drift to start another, and repeat the process indefinitely. Our character of choice will be Odie. This is because of his full cosmetic bonus, which makes lasagna boosts last longer. However, the game is actually bugged, and this boost also applies to drift boosting, causing said boosts to last a bit longer and making chaining drifts a bit easier. Now then, let's really get started. So immediately, I ran into some issues. After unbinding my accelerate button, I began racing Cats in the Hood. This is the most basic track in the game, and to be honest, I almost completely gave up before I even beat it. I spent hours on Cats, and I couldn't quite catch up to the other racers in time. Plus, I'd get terrible item luck, never getting any lasagna or perfume. And after hours of attempts, I was pretty much convinced the challenge was impossible. I wasn't even getting close. I was about ready to give up, when suddenly... I'm so tired. I did it! I beat Cats in the Hood without gas! But to be honest, Cats was the easiest of the 4 tracks, and after a bit of experimenting on the other 4, I realized that there was no way I'd be able to beat them with my current strategy. I had been racing Cats in 150cc. However, I realized it was much easier to catch up to the other racers in 50cc. So on the other tracks, I switched to 50cc and started getting much closer to winning. Finally, this challenge looked possible. I've been trying crazy dunes for a while in 150cc with no success. But in 50cc, it became much more manageable. The slower speeds allowed for more time to direct my drift chains. There were less boost pads than on the first track, but with some luck, I managed to win eventually. Pale Rock Lake was next. This track was interesting. Pale Rock features the most booster pads in the Lasagna Cup. You can basically get through the entire lake section for free. However, there was one big issue I ran into during Pale Rock Lake. I was too good at the game. At this point, I had gotten pretty used to drift chaining and was consistently pulling it off. This, on top of many booster pads throughout the track, resulted in me finding myself in first place before even finishing the first lap. This may seem good at face value, but in first place, you rarely get any speed boosting items. So if I made even one mistake, I was out of luck. On top of that, the other racers would actually be able to hit me with pie and other items, which would completely kill my momentum, rendering me useless. So my strategy for Pale Rock was to play badly. Basically, I would stay just behind the other racers and pull ahead on the last lap, which eventually worked. Finally, we're on the last track. This challenge, which originally seemed impossible, was turning out to be more than possible. However, the final track was threatening to end the run. City Slicker had a few key differences compared to the other tracks. First, I had to drive forward for the item boxes. This wasn't that big of a deal, but it was a bit more tedious. The bigger problem was the reason I had to drive forward. At the very end of the track, I sat a jump with no booster pads before it. Due to the curves before the ramp, I needed to use a booster item before jumping. Also, after the boost was an extremely tight turn. It was nearly impossible to chain drift boosts around it, so I needed another booster item to help complete the turn. The luck needed for this track was going to be crazy, but I knew I could do it. It took a long time, but eventually. just like that, I completed the entire Lasagna Cup. After hours of repetitive driving, getting stuck on railings, and terrible item luck, I successfully drove through every track without hitting the accelerate button once. But this got me wondering, what about the other 3 cups? No, trust me, I tried. I was able to complete Country Bumpkin and Spooky Manor, but I couldn't even get close on the other tracks. That is, except for one. Not only was I able to beat Prohibited Sight, but I also won by driving backwards. Of course, this involved what some might call cheating. But hey, driving into a pit to break the game is a perfectly viable method in my book. So in the end, I was able to beat 7 tracks without the gas pedal. Maybe now I can finally get my license back from the DMV. So, apparently intentionally driving into a pit is not acceptable on the road. Oh well, maybe next time.